A new, grim champion arises. The Dark Crusader.
Well, look at this! Another Souls ripoff from Deck 13. Wait a minute, this isn't Deck 13? The new game is still published by Polish publisher CI Games, but now they tasked their in-house studio Hexworks with developing the game. So maybe this game isn't as cheap and janky as its predecessor, because, let's be honest, Deck 13 isn't really known for their highly polished and well-designed games. So we're off to a good start. This new iteration of the Lords of the Fallen, well, is this a franchise now? Is it a series? Is this game a sequel? I mean, it was supposed to be one, but then they dropped the subheading and called this a reboot. Well, the intro has some similarities to the one in the original. There's a war going on between humans and demons, and then the demon god gets defeated, but hundreds of years later he is about to re-emerge from the demon realm or something. Instead of a named and voiced protagonist with a backstory though, that has been led to this place to prevent the demon god's reappearance, we are now a nameless corpse, given artificial life by a magical lantern that seems to be the key to stop the evil god and bring peace once and for all. Or maybe destruction, since this is a Souls-like. So if the narration were less explicit, this might just have been a possible Dark Souls 4. That said, there's something off with this intro movie. I can't really pinpoint it, but it seems way too busy. A lot of this looks over-animated and the individual scenes are just a tiny bit too short. The virtual camera should linger just a bit longer before cutting away. It's not really a problem yet, it just looks a bit weird to me. But oh boy, the game plays as fast as this intro movie. This is nothing like the original game, where you played as this bear of a man, this hunk of muscles, this unstoppable force slowly winding up powerful destructive blows. Here you're quick as the wind, dashing speedily left and right, covering a lot of ground with your fast attacks. But so are the enemies. There are still some slow and heavy attacks for both you and your opponents, but the overall tempo of combat is much higher than in the original and still pretty high within this genre. Funnily enough, the game has a similar approach to combat as the recently released Lies of P. Well, that's a coincidence, in that blocking doesn't really prevent you from taking damage and demands a more active approach. The shields in this game don't engender passivity, because whenever you block, you receive wither damage, a kind of potential damage to your HP that becomes actual damage as soon as you get hit by an attack. By striking enemies yourself, you slowly regain the health affected by withering, kinda like the rallying system in Bloodborne or Lies of P, just without a time limit. So as long as you don't take any hits, you can regain all the health lost due to withering. So to not have this be overpowered, which I don't think it is, since you get doubly punished for blocking attacks with stamina loss and withering, but to make it a bit harder for you, enemies deal withering damage even when you parry an attack with a perfect block. The parry system works exactly the same as in Lies of P. You don't really stagger the enemy with a parry, but your parry is the most effective way to deplete an enemy's stagger gauge. Backstabs, normal attacks and charge attacks also deplete this gauge, to differing amounts, but especially against more durable foes and bosses, you want to get the timings on your blocks right to get a chance to deal a critical attack. But since parrying also withers your health, the game forces you into a constant rhythm between offense and active defense. Sounds pretty good, right? Thing is, your withered health fills up slowly with each attack. So you need a bunch of hits to regain it, and even a critical attack after staggering the enemy doesn't always regain all of it. And it doesn't inflict that much damage on the enemy. So you are at a pretty hefty disadvantage, and I don't think that this is such a good idea. And I don't even think a perfect parry should prevent any withering damage. But since parrying, same as in Lies of P, doesn't break the enemy's combo in any way, they can just continue to attack, a reduced amount of wither damage would be fair. Like, let's say, the wither damage from blocking an attack is about half of what the attack would have dealt if you hadn't blocked, then the wither damage from a perfect block should be maybe just 10 or maybe 20% at max of it. Bosses especially have many multiple hit combos with a rather long reach, so parrying even one full attack of them might leave you with zero room for error afterwards. And if the enemy isn't open for a critical attack to regain a greater chunk of your withered health and have a short breather, then you might as well just use a potion because the risk of losing it all just increased dramatically. Even an enemy sneeze could kill you now if you don't block it. Also, the window for critical attacks is pathetically short, so the whole system doesn't feel rewarding, but like something you're supposed to just be perfect with. At least your dodge isn't as stiff as in Lies of P, so you have a few more options in combat, but since enemy attacks cover a lot of ground and have a high amount of tracking, you can't rely that much on your roll as well. And this is once again a Souls-like that likes to fuck with you and has enemies hold their attack unintuitively long. Or maybe even counterintuitively long. Because the animation and length of the wind-up of many attacks seems to be designed to trick you into dodging just early enough to get hit by the whole brunt of the attack. This is nothing new for more recent Souls-likes. As soon as players got accustomed to the punishing nature of Demon Souls and Dark Souls, these attack patterns turned up more and more often, while attack speeds increased up to just a few frames, demanding more and more perfection from players. I think this notion is a bit misguided. It misunderstands what Souls was originally about. It was about observation and patience and perseverance whenever you had trouble with a boss or a particularly difficult segment. But in later Souls games, as well as all the Souls-likes, it seems to be all about memorization of attack patterns, perfect execution of combat maneuvers, and a bunch of cheap hits and cheap deaths. You don't win against the boss anymore because you entered the fight well prepared and had a good plan. Now you win because you learned when to press which button. Like this was some Kaizo game made for shits and giggles, but not to experience an epic dark fantasy tale. Not saying that this is bad overall, I just like to see another game in the vein of Demon Souls, and not just Dark Souls 3. It also doesn't help that the game constantly eats my inputs. Like, after successful parrying, too often my character doesn't attack back, but just stands there and wastes time and opportunity to regain my withered health. And this is something I do have an actual problem with. The game throws so much against me. I'm dead within a few hits. Neither blocking nor parrying prevents me from taking damage. And the more I've blocked and parried, the worse the next successful enemy attack will be. So, if you want to be that fucking punishing, at least have the decency to register my button inputs. And not only when you want to throw me under the bus with the input buffering, but by having me counterattack when I press the button. Same goes for dodging. When I press a direction and haven't locked onto anything, I expect to roll in that direction. But because the game is always a bit iffy with its animations and it seems to react not to your input, but to what the character is doing, there is sometimes a bit of a disconnect between what you're doing on the controller and what the game is making of it. So because the character hasn't actually moved, even though I pressed forward, my dodge roll became a backstab right off the fucking ledge behind me. The timing itself wasn't a problem, just that for some reason, maybe because of my character's alignment or because of some collision with another object, the in-game model had some delay before the running animation started. So the game counted this as a dodge while standing, which results in a backstab. Something like this mustn't happen in a game so punishing, where you can instantly die and lose everything. Animations overall threw a wrench in the works for me all the goddamn time. Reclaiming your lost souls has your character taking out his lamp and then casually sucking them in. It takes an eternity and you can't do anything else during that time, aside from slowly walking onwards. At first I thought the game didn't register me pressing the button, but nah, it just takes forever. This also applies to picking up items, at least those that aren't random enemy drops. So if you lose some souls during a boss fight, accept that you most likely won't get them back, because picking them up during the fight is too risky and a waste of a good opportunity to deal damage, or avoid the relentless attacks. Lies of P finally broke this devilish cycle and just dropped your souls in front of the boss room entrance, so that you can turn them in before attempting the boss again. Demon's Souls had a unique idea with this system, but since then, games have only copied this without really thinking about the benefits of the system. On that note, souls themselves behave different than in other Souls-likes. When an enemy gets killed, the souls drop shortly afterwards on their corpse, but most of the time you're right next to them and automatically and immediately collect them. But sometimes, when you fight multiple enemies and run and dodge around a lot, or when the enemy dies to some other hazard farther away from you, those souls just stay there. You have to get close to collect them, rather than just sucking them in wherever you are. I guess the devs did this because there is sometimes some enemy infighting and you have to jump into the fray to collect the rewards. And I guess the infighting is also the reason why there are sometimes item drops lying around. Though they sometimes also appear in areas where there isn't an enemy or next to a still living enemy. I don't know, the game is a bit glitchy. Blocking is also bound to your animation, and most of the time you don't even see it. A few times I wondered why I got hit despite having pressed the block button, and other times I wasn't sure if the game even registered me pressing it. Because the animation is so subtle, at least from behind, but it matters. If your shield isn't up, then you're not blocking. It's only a few frames, but so is the enemy's attack. And it feels to me that pretty much all animations have a bit too much dead air at the end. Like, the wind down takes just a few frames too long. Like, you use your healing or an item and it's fine, but now you can't attack or dodge for a minute. Or you attacked and even though the attack is over for a while now, you're not allowed to block yet. This is once again hard to really pin down, and it might just be my personal sensibility, but it just feels a bit unsatisfying. But you know what's quick, what's responsive? Killing yourself. Like in most, if not all other Souls-likes, you have a suicide item in your inventory that you can use to travel back to your checkpoint, at the cost of all your souls. But oh god, be careful to never highlight your cyanide pill in your quick access menu when you don't plan on using it, because just one tap of the item button activates it and you'll immediately kill yourself. Happened to me when I wanted to quickly heal. Why don't you have to hold the button to activate it? To really commit to it. You have to hold the button to skip a cutscene on rewatch, or to level up, or to fucking shut down the game. So why not when you try to kill yourself? Also, your cyanide pill doesn't drop your souls, they are just gone, so it's always better to throw yourself off a cliff than using the suicide item. The only good time to use it would be when you're stuck somewhere, clipped into an object or something, which kinda is a cruel punishment for encountering a glitch or bug. But the thing in this game that pissed me off the most, that reeks of either cruelty or incompetence, is the lock-on. The fucking thing only works when it wants to, and that's not even half of the time. And it can really screw you over when it targets the completely wrong enemy, or just doesn't let you target the only enemy in front of you. Or the lock-on breaks and you roll into the enemy's weapon range because instead of switching targets, you move the camera around. And sometimes the game just decides for you to roll into some bullshit direction. Or the camera just moves somewhere without tracking the targeted enemy correctly. Or your character doesn't really track the enemy. Sometimes you can target enemies on the ground, sometimes not. And it seems when you're not locked on, then the game does everything in its power to not have you hit the enemy in front of you. So far this is all a bit janky. Movement itself and attacking feels fine. You have to be a bit careful when attacking because most of your attacks have you step or leap forwards. And it felt at times that I got dragged towards an enemy when I wasn't in range, but I can't really recreate this, so maybe I'm just imagining things. All these smaller and bigger, in the case of the lock-on massive flaws, wouldn't be half as bad if it weren't for the fact that many encounters are just plain mean. They spam enemies at you, they put you against hard-hitting sponges in the middle of groups of ranged and pack enemies, sometimes multiple hard-hitting sponges. They throw ranged fighters with mid-ranged melee weapons into a platforming section that's already a janky affair in a Souls game, but then they make one of them even invulnerable because he's protected by an invisible ghost bug. Or a hidden enemy on a small ledge around a corner that immediately uses an unblockable shoving attack to throw you down the walkway. Enemies are either useless fodder or super competent all-rounders. Why does the ranged fighter also have the unblockable, uninterruptible shove attack that flings you 5 meters through the air and has next to no wind-up? Some enemies slide incredibly fast through the ground while being invulnerable and attack as soon as they emerge and appear in areas where you already have to fight the camera and can't really maneuver around. And I'm not talking about some endgame content here, when you've mastered all the game's systems. I'm just a few hours in and already the game shows no mercy. They pit enemies with completely unknown movesets against you at the end of a gauntlet where you most likely used up all your resources. It feels like the devs wanted all these sections to be tedious and frustrating. I'd love to fight some of these enemies and really experience their combat style without having to fear falling down all the time or being attacked from ranged enemies I can't reach or ganged up by packs of fodder enemies. And even the fodder takes too many hits and doesn't flinch when you cave their heads in. And you often have to fight in narrow corridors and cluttered environments, and the enemies can body block you and just trap you in a corner and wail on you. Whenever you're allowed to duel an enemy and maneuver around, it's actually fun. But too often the game doesn't play to this strength. There is some good weapon variety in this game, not as big as in Elden Ring, though I think it's unfair to compare any game to the massive weapon and combat style variety of Elden Ring. Not that games shouldn't try to follow its example. But yeah, there are a lot of weapons and you can execute some fun combo attacks. The devs seriously knew their stuff. The game isn't as incompetently made as the original, but it's misguided in a lot of places. The biggest gameplay feature in this game is the swapping between the living and the demon or maybe dead realm, the Axiom and the Umbra. Both realms are spatially in the same place, but you can't interact with them simultaneously. Your lamp helps you see parts of the Umbral realm, and when you step into the eerie illumination, you can interact with the Umbral realm. At least as long as it doesn't cause you to put your lamp away. Except for when you can't. It's a tiny bit inconsistent and you have to learn the limitations over the course of the game. But this mechanic leads to some neat little puzzles and opens up so many possibilities for exploration. When you fall in battle, you get only sent to the Umbral realm, but if you die in the Umbral realm, you die for real. You can also use your lamp to voluntarily enter the Umbral realm, to have greater freedom in exploring this realm and also interact with certain objects you were otherwise prohibited. And some enemies can attack out of the Umbra when you illuminate them and immediately drag you into it. To leave the Umbral realm, you have to rest at your bonfire or interact with these glowing corpses that react to your lamp. The corpse shatters after you've used it, so you can't just use it to get infinite revives, but resting does restore the glowy corpses along with all the enemies and traps. While you are in Umbral form, enemies will spawn infinitely near you, growing stronger and stronger the longer you remain in this form, until at some point a powerful hunter is sent after you. But this can often lead to massive enemy spam, and it can really bite you in the ass when you're battling a hard foe, get killed during it and reawaken in Umbral state, and now have to still deal with them, but also with packs of zombies and maybe even ranged enemies who were previously not able to attack you in the Axiom realm. The idea of the twin realities is pretty darn great and creatively implemented. I like what it does to exploration and how this leads to a better use of the illusionary walls than how every FromSoft game handled it so far. It's only the infinite enemy spawn that doesn't need to happen, at least not from the start. Having Umbral enemies is fine, you can still design your encounters around them. But instead of immediately spawning a never-ending barrage of zombies, have this be a penalty for staying too long in the Umbral Realm. The system already exists, just have it so that instead of seeking a hunter after you as punishment, maybe have it two-tiered, where the first time the countdown runs out, the infinite spawn starts, and the next time, the hunter appears. Then there would at least be a warning and a chance for you to prevent this. As it is now, it's tedious at best and unfairly brutal at worst. With all these flaws, and some are really infuriating, this still is a much better and more competently made Souls clone than the original game. And yeah, it is a Souls clone through and through, more so than other Souls-likes, more so than Neo, Lies of P or fucking Darksiders. The Umbral Realm is a really neat addition that gives this game a sort of own identity and personality, but the whole art design, the way you interact with NPCs, the way they talk and appear shady and might stab you in the back at some point, the approach to level design, everything is so much Dark Souls. The original game, while it certainly was a blatant Souls ripoff back then, at least it had a different approach to the story. The story was shit, but the game tried to go somewhere with it. And now they rebooted it for another Souls lookalike that doesn't try its own thing. But did they? Because the original game story is mentioned in this game. Harkin's adventure happened. So I guess this game's backstory isn't the same as the original's backstory, but actually the events of the original game. You see the demon hand in the background and can see the monastery in the mountains. And you even meet the original's protagonist, who's now an old mentor character or something. Or maybe he's the surprise villain from the first game, because he has a bit of a flumpy arm. Kinda like the final boss. I don't know. So this isn't really a reboot. Maybe a soft reboot, because the original's events have no real bearing on this game, aside from a few references here and there. But it still seems to be a sequel, so why not just commit to it? Why rebrand, especially when you just try to copy another game again? The original game had some striking visual design. It wasn't unique or anything. It looked a lot like Warcraft with the huge shoulder pads and overall weapon and armor designs, but it had popping colors. It wasn't afraid to be colorful. This game is grey and subdued. Not bad looking, but miserable in the same way Souls games are. There are way more enemy designs and different armor pieces, weapon skins and shields than in the original, but nothing distinguishes this game visually from any other dark fantasy game. It looks good for the most part, when the textures aren't flickering or loading in too late, or when structures and objects in the distance manage to be textured, but yeah, it's a good looking game. Not the first next-gen looking Souls-like as IGN claimed, because we already have the Demon's Souls remake, but nevertheless a very pretty game in all its disgusting and haunting beauty. The performance is horrible though, mostly during cutscenes. They seem to be in a really low frame rate, and at one point it dropped even lower, not slowing down, just having all the animations in like 10 FPS. And while the game runs mostly smooth on my PS5, I've heard bad things about the Xbox and PC version, there are some stutters and frame drops here and there, and this just shouldn't happen in a game like this, where timing is important, especially in this game where timing is of even greater importance. And I am playing on performance mode, because why wouldn't I in an action game? Oh yeah, and when you enter the Umbral Realm and have all the fog effects and stuff, the frame rate really tanks. So yeah, what do I think of this game at the end of the day? I like it, and kinda hate it at times. When it works, it's really fun, but too often it pisses me off. Many Souls-likes do, and I guess it comes a bit with the genre, but this game infuriates me more with its jank and unfair encounters than, for example, Lies of P, or Darksiders 3, or Code Vein, or well, the FromSoft Souls games. On the other hand, as linear as the game is when it comes to available areas, the exploration gets really open-ended with the two realms, and not just with the odd illusionary wall here and there, but giant walkways made out of spines and demon corpses, whole as areas underwater or suspended in the air. The game went all out with the Umbral Realm. It's like they put a whole ass Giga game inside this Souls-like. So I'd say this game's highs can get really high, but the lows are really low and come in abundance. Play at your own risk. And of course, have an awesome day. This has been Rady, and I hope to see you again on the next game.